you talked about kind of building this culture, that it comes from the top. That if culture kind of eats strategy, culture kind of creates the boundaries of what's possible. You can have a strategy that, I'm going to go run every day and I'm going to lose 50 pounds in a month and I'm going to, but if the culture that you've created for yourself doesn't support it, then that's probably not going to happen. In talking about kind of how you create this, you pointed out that it starts at the top, and it's interesting that at the heart of this letter to the Philippian church is this kind of poetic section about Jesus and the situation of him in equality with God and servanthood and those kinds of things. And how does that kind of view of Jesus filter down and create the culture that Paul allows Paul to go through what he's going through in prison, but also allows the church at Philippi to go through what they're going through?
At one point Paul says, let each esteem others better than themselves and not pursue your own interests, but the interests of others. And we get no better model of that than Jesus, and maybe we get no second better model of that than Paul. In basic ultimate, we're asking people to kind of check pride at the door, to kind of check selfishness at the door, and to engage in sacrifice and see the value in it, see the worth in it. And it's one of those things like, if your CEO of a company comes and is asking you to make the sacrifice, but you see that they're not, it's very hollow words, and it's probably not going to filter down to any degree. But we see quite the opposite here.
And so what is the argument that Paul engages in about what is different or special about Jesus? What did Jesus do? What makes him different than any other king?
So it was the humility, and although being the King of Kings, he comes down as a servant and comes down to serve. We get other places in the Gospels where it talks about Jesus coming to serve and not be served. We get the idea that Jesus' idea of leadership shouldn't be like the Gentiles. It should be that he who is the greatest servant, or he who is the greatest leader is servant of all, or something of this sort. And it's just a very different idea than ancient culture, modern culture of what a leader is, and it sticks.
There's part of that poem that's a contrast, I think, with Adam. You have the situation with Adam where Adam desires equality with God. I mean, the whole purpose behind eating of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil is the desire to pursue equality with God. And then you have Jesus who is equal with God, but doesn't hold on to that equality and gives it up. And what's the lesson to be learned in this contrast between Adam and Jesus?
I guess it's the same one kind of Paul voices. He talks about all these things that were gained to him as being loss. And basically not kind of holding on to any identity outside of Christ, anything that's kind of worldly admiration or power or anything of this, but everything should be subjected and in service to God. And Paul goes down that same route of all these things that were gained to me, but I count them all as rubbish.
And so in the world around us, do we see these things, these ideas being played out? Is it still the case that people in their lives are pursuing equality with God? Is that still, are we still reaching out for the apple, so to speak? And what's the culture's view of the path of Jesus? Because I think we have a culture that at the very least gives some sort of lip service to, trying to help others, trying to be, trying to serve others. I mean, we have all kinds of companies that, if you buy a pair of shoes from us, we'll send a pair of shoes to Africa, or, what I'm saying? Is the culture really taken on? Is the culture really been baptized and given up Adam's desires and is decided to side with Jesus? Or is there something else happening there?
I think many of us like the theory of sacrificing for others, but we find it most convenient if either it's done from our tax monies, our tax revenues, or if maybe we donate towards it, but actually engaging in it ourselves, I don't know, it's kind of, lots of people like the theory of people and don't really like people, kind of along those same lines. But I don't think we really are. If you look, this country was founded on the idea that those who were in power would be called public servants, and it's a word we still use, but it's pretty hollow.
And so it seems to me like kind of the con man's idea of what a nice person is. It seems like we repackage servanthood as a way to hide our desire for kingship. The idea of a naked grab at kingship is no longer acceptable. So we can use an apparent servant heart to still grasp at it without calling attention to the fact that we're grasping at it. On the other hand, I think that in a lot of Christian circles, the idea of servant leadership is a really big one. But I don't know that it always hits the mark. What are some of the problems that can be encountered with kind of the church culture's view of servant leadership?
Oftentimes it's that of being a servant without being a leader at all. I don't know, it's obviously you can have a tyrannical leader on one end, or you can have pure servants on the other end. But servant leadership is supposed to be the hybrid of the two. Mm-hmm. And it seems like in the church it's really popular now to do one without the other. And the truth, I think it's just because it's easier. True leadership and having to sometimes engage in, say, discipline or some of the more difficult things and stuff like that. It's not fun, There's a fair amount of conflict that's often involved with it and things of this sort. And but true leadership, Jesus, if you look, Peter, do you really love me? You look at how he handled his disciples and stuff like this, and was he a servant? Absolutely, but was he a leader? 100%.
Yeah, I think that's the part that's missing is we feel like that if there's any confrontation or rebuke that's taking place, then we're missing the mark on the servant leadership because somehow that shouldn't be a part of it. But by Jesus' example and Paul's own example in his letters to the different churches, obviously they don't hesitate to engage in that. There seems to be this idea that those things are a mark of the failure of our servant-heartedness. That if we only do the serving of others good enough, that they'll follow, and we can achieve a 100% success rate. If the people that we lead are not 100% happy and satisfied with our leadership, then we just haven't served them enough. Is that accurate?
I'd say there's a fair amount of that, and that's accurate, yeah.
And so what's wrong with that notion?
And let's apply that to being parents, right? If my kids aren't 100% satisfied all day long, well, unfortunately, they'd never do their schoolwork and they'd never do their chores, and and they definitely never get disciplined in any meaningful way, and they'd never grow.
Yeah, and it seems to be a silly standard, and when you look at the fact that obviously Jesus was the model and he didn't achieve 100% success rate. In fact, far from it. His ministry among the Jewish people was kind of in his lifetime something of a failure, and then even in the church wasn't 100% successful. So what do we kind of learn from this idea? It seems like there's a transfer of authority that happens when we have this view that if my servanthood is just good enough, I'll be 100% successful. What's wrong with that picture?
Yeah, you're making those you're supposed to be in leadership over kind of in leadership over you.
Yeah.
Ultimately, they're judging you, but I think also, I think maybe at the heart of this is sometimes it's real easy to kind of get lost down the trap of forgetting that we're here to make disciples, not to get people to think that we're nice guys.